In the frozen wilderness of eastern Finland, on a morning when thermometers registered -40 degrees Celsius, a solitary figure lay concealed beneath layers of snow and white fabric. The date was the 21st of December, 1939. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, a monotonous expanse of white interrupted only by skeletal trees and the occasional drift of wind-blown powder. Through this harsh terrain, a formation of 200 Soviet infantrymen trudged forward in their standard-issue brown greatcoats. Their progress was laborious, each step requiring them to lift their legs high to clear snow that reached above their knees. The Red Army had not provided snowshoes to these men, and their struggle was evident in every movement. They formed a dark, snaking line against the pristine white background, completely exposed and visible from a considerable distance. Hidden behind a carefully constructed snow embankment 150 meters away, a man had been lying motionless since the hours before sunrise. His name was Simo Häyhä, a corporal serving in the 6th Company of Finland's 34th Infantry Regiment. At 28 years old, he stood barely 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed perhaps 130 pounds. In his hands, he cradled a Finnish manufactured Soko rifle, a modified version of the most elegant design that had been adapted specifically for Arctic conditions. The weapon bore no telescopic sights mounted atop its receiver. Instead, it featured only the most basic sighting arrangement, a simple notched rear sight and a blade-style front post, identical to what Finnish hunters had relied upon for generations. The rifle's stock had been carved from Arctic birch, a wood specifically chosen because it would not warp or crack in temperatures that could kill an unprepared man within hours. Häyhä's breathing followed a carefully controlled rhythm, slow and deliberate, each breath measured and purposeful. Inside his mouth, he held a small quantity of packed snow pressed against the inside of his cheeks. This unusual technique served a critical purpose in the frigid air. Any warm breath escaping from his mouth would immediately condense into visible vapor that could betray his position to observant enemy soldiers. The snow absorbed the warmth and moisture, preventing any telltale fog from forming. His rifle barrel rested on a precisely shaped mound of packed snow that he had constructed in complete darkness hours earlier. The placement was calculated to prevent the muzzle blast from disturbing the snow around the barrel, which would create a visible puff that might reveal his location. Over his winter uniform, he wore a white camouflage smock that rendered him virtually invisible against the surrounding snow. The Soviet soldiers advancing toward him could not see him. In their current state, exhausted and cold, they would not have seen him even as they had been looking directly at his position. He aligned his sights on the first man in the column. Through the iron sights, he established what marksmen call a proper sight picture. The front blade settled into the center of the rear notch. He ensured the top of the front blade sat perfectly level with the top of the rear notch. The target appeared just above this alignment. This sight picture was one he had established thousands upon thousands of times throughout his life, hunting elk and white-tailed deer in these very forests since boyhood. The rifle discharged. The sound was sharp and flat, quickly absorbed by the snow-covered landscape. The first Soviet soldier dropped instantly. The column halted. Men looked around in confusion, trying to determine where the shot had originated. He worked the bolt mechanism with practiced efficiency. Extract the spent cartridge, eject it, load a fresh round from the magazine, close the bolt, lock it into position. The entire action was smooth and unconscious, performed thousands of times in practice. The rifle was already realigned on his next target. The second shot rang out. Another Soviet soldier fell. Now panic began to spread through the column. Men scattered in different directions, some seeking cover behind trees, others dropping into the snow itself. But this particular section of forest offered minimal concealment. The trees were too thin, too widely spaced to provide adequate protection. He continued firing methodically. Each shot was aimed with precision. Each shot found its intended target. Within approximately 3 minutes, 25 Soviet soldiers lay dead or dying in the snow. The survivors retreated, running and stumbling through the deep drifts back toward their own lines. He did not pursue them. He remained absolutely motionless behind his snowbank for another full hour, observing and waiting, ensuring that no one would return to the area. As twilight approached around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, winter darkness arrives early at these northern latitudes. He withdrew from his position. He moved low to the ground, using terrain features for concealment, remaining invisible throughout his withdrawal. By the time complete darkness had fallen over the forest, he was back within Finnish lines, reporting to his company commander. 25 confirmed kills on December 21st, 1939. It was his highest single-day total of the entire war. This account represents the authentic reality of Simo Häyhä's combat experience during the Winter War. This is how the man, who would ultimately be credited with more than 500 enemy kills in less than 100 days of fighting, conducted his deadly work. The truly remarkable aspect of his effectiveness, the element that seems almost incomprehensible when examined closely, was not some superhuman ability or access to exotic equipment or knowledge of secret techniques unknown to military science. Rather, it was his deliberate choice to use the simplest, most basic rifle sights available. Iron sights, open sights, the same sighting system that millions of hunters and target shooters had used for more than a century, while snipers from other nations were equipping themselves with increasingly sophisticated telescopic optics that magnified their targets and theoretically extended their effective range. He achieved the highest confirmed kill count of any sniper in any major war, using sights that offered no magnification whatsoever. Understanding why this approach worked, why this seemingly counterintuitive choice made him more effective rather than less capable, requires a thorough understanding of the Winter War's context and the specific conditions under which he operated. The Winter War commenced on the 30th of November, 1939, when the Soviet Union launched an invasion of Finland. The justification was manufactured, based on a border incident near the village of Mainila, where Soviet artillery positions allegedly came under Finnish fire. Most historians now agree that the Soviets deliberately shelled their own positions to create a pretext for invasion. Joseph Stalin wanted Finnish territory. Specifically, Soviet demands included Finland ceding the Karelian Isthmus, a strategic strip of land that would provide a buffer zone protecting Leningrad, along with granting the Soviet Union permission to establish military bases on Finnish soil. Finland refused these demands. The Soviet leadership anticipated a swift victory. Their intelligence assessments predicted that Finnish military forces would collapse within a matter of weeks. Why would they expect anything different? Finland had a total population of 3,700,000 people. The Soviet Union had 170 million. When Finland mobilized for defense, they managed to field approximately 320,000 soldiers. The Soviets committed somewhere between 450,000 and 760,000 troops to the invasion, with the exact number varying depending on which phase of the war and which historical sources one consults. The Soviet force included approximately 6,000 tanks. Finland possessed 32 tanks at the war's outset. The Soviets deployed roughly 3,000 aircraft. Finland had 114. On paper, examining these raw numbers, the Red Army should have reached the Finnish capital of Helsinki within 2 weeks. However, the Red Army of 1939 was not the same military force that would later defeat Nazi Germany. Stalin's purges of 1937 and 38 had devastated the officer corps. Thousands of experienced military leaders had been executed or sent to forced labor camps on charges of treason, espionage, and counter-revolutionary activity. The officers who survived were politically reliable but often tactically incompetent. They were afraid to demonstrate initiative, afraid to question orders, afraid of being accused of defeatism as they reported problems to their superiors. The result was a military force that was numerically massive but organizationally dysfunctional. Soviet soldiers received equipment designed for conventional warfare in temperate conditions. They wore brown coats that stood out starkly against snow-covered terrain. They had no specialized winter equipment, no snowshoes, inadequate cold weather gear. In some Soviet units, frostbite casualties actually exceeded combat casualties. The logistic system proved incapable of supplying troops operating in the Finnish wilderness. Roads were few and far between. Supply columns became stranded in snowdrifts. Ammunition and food failed to reach forward units with any regularity. Soviet military doctrine emphasized mass assault tactics, overwhelming firepower, and rapid advances along main roads. But the Karelian terrain offered very few roads. The roads that did exist were narrow, winding, and easily blocked by even small defending forces. The forests were dense. Swamps, frozen but treacherous, extended 4 miles in every direction. The Finns knew this terrain intimately. They knew which paths to take, which frozen lakes would support the weight of men and supplies, where to position defensive positions to maximize the effectiveness of their limited forces. Finnish soldiers dressed entirely in white, not just white uniforms, but complete white camouflage smocks, white balaclavas, white mittens. Against the snow, they were nearly invisible. They employed mobility as their primary advantage, striking Soviet columns with sudden attacks, inflicting casualties, then withdrawing before the Soviets could bring their superior firepower to bear. The Finns developed what they called motti tactics. The word motti referred to a measured stack of firewood. The tactic involved allowing Soviet columns to advance deep into Finnish territory along roads, then cutting the column into isolated segments, surrounding each segment, and destroying it piece by piece. Soviet units found themselves trapped, unable to maneuver in the deep snow, becoming easy targets for Finnish infantry and machine gun fire. Into this environment came the Soviet conscript infantry, young men from Ukraine, Belarus, and Central Russia, many of whom had never seen combat, poorly trained, inadequately equipped, led by officers who were more concerned with political correctness than tactical effectiveness. Waiting for them, hidden in the snow, were Finnish soldiers like Simo Häyhä, men who had grown up in these forests, who knew instinctively how to survive in extreme cold, who could move silently through snow, who could shoot accurately at ranges most soldiers would consider impossible with basic iron sights. He was born on the 17th of December, 1905, in the village of Rautjärvi in southern Finland. His family were Lutheran farmers. He was the second youngest of 8 children. His childhood was typical for rural Finland in the early 20th century. He attended school, helped with farm work, and spent considerable time hunting in the surrounding forests. Hunting was not sport in the sense that wealthy Europeans understood the term. It was subsistence. Elk, white-tailed deer, rabbits, game birds. These animals provided meat for the winter months when farm produce was unavailable. A successful hunt might mean the difference between adequate nutrition and genuine hunger during the months when temperatures remained below freezing, 4 weeks at a time. He became a skilled marksman by necessity. He learned to judge distances by eye alone, to account for wind effects, to control his breathing, to fire accurately with iron sights at ranges extending to several hundred meters. By his late teenage years, his family's farmhouse was filled with trophies from shooting competitions held throughout the region. In 1925, at age 19, he entered mandatory military service. All Finnish men were required to serve 15 months. He was assigned to a bicycle battalion, a type of mobile infantry that could deploy quickly along Finland's limited road network. His superiors recognized his exceptional shooting ability and recommended him for non-commissioned officer training. He attended the National NCO Academy and graduated with the rank of corporal. In 1927, he received formal sniper training at the military's training center. His instructors noted his exceptional ability to judge distances accurately without instruments. They also noted his remarkable patience, his willingness to remain in position for hours without moving. his methodical approach to selecting firing positions. After completing his military service, he returned to farming and hunting. He joined the Civil Guard, a Finnish militia organization, and participated regularly in shooting competitions throughout the region. When the Finnish military adopted the Soko rifle in the early 1930s, Civil Guard members were given the option to purchase their service rifles. He bought his, serial number 35280-1. It became the rifle he knew better than any other piece of equipment he owned. He fired thousands of rounds through it, learning its peculiarities, memorizing how it shot at different ranges, in different wind conditions, in different temperatures. When the Soviet Union invaded Finland in November 1939, he mustered with the 6th Company of the 34th Infantry Regiment. He insisted on keeping his own rifle rather than accepting a newly issued weapon. His commanders, recognizing his experience and exceptional skill, agreed to this unusual request. The rifle he carried into combat was not special by military standards. It was a Finnish variant of the Russian motionless design, chambered in 7.6 by 53 mm. The Soko version featured improved manufacturing quality, a better barrel, more precise tolerances, but fundamentally, it was a bolt-action rifle whose basic design had entered service in the 1890s. It had a 5-round magazine, required manual operation, had no automatic or semi-automatic capability, and critically, mounted no telescopic sight. Häyhä's rifle was equipped with standard iron sights, a simple notched rear sight adjustable for elevation, a blade front sight. This was the equipment that would make him the deadliest sniper in military history. The choice to use iron sights rather than a telescopic sight was entirely deliberate. He had specific practical reasons, all rooted in the conditions of the Winter War and the tactics he employed. The first reason was optical reliability in extreme cold. Telescopic sights available in the late 1930s were prone to fogging and freezing in sub-zero conditions. The winter of 1939–40 was exceptionally cold, with the Karelian Isthmus experiencing a record low temperature of -43°C on January 16, 1940. At these temperatures, moisture inside a telescopic sight would freeze, rendering the optics completely useless. Condensation would fog the lenses. Ice crystals would form on interior surfaces. A scope that worked perfectly at the proving ground in temperate conditions became a liability in Arctic warfare. Iron sights, by contrast, had no glass components that could fog or freeze. They were simple pieces of machined steel. Temperature had no effect on their function whatsoever. A Finnish soldier could lie in the snow 4 hours at -40°, and when he raised his rifle to fire, the sights would work exactly as designed. The second reason was optical signature. A telescopic sight could catch and reflect light, potentially giving away a sniper's position. A single glint of sunlight off the glass could be enough to alert Soviet soldiers to Häyhä's location, transforming the hunter into the hunted. The physics of this were straightforward. Glass lenses, even with anti-reflective coatings, which were primitive in the 1930s, would reflect ambient light. In the low-angle winter sun of Finland, where daylight lasted only 6 hours at the peak of winter, sunlight could strike a scope at nearly horizontal angles. A reflection visible for even a fraction of a second could draw counter-sniper fire or artillery bombardment onto his position. He understood this implicitly. He had spent years hunting in these forests. He knew exactly how light behaved in this environment. He knew that maintaining stealth was more valuable than gaining magnification. The third reason was profile height. Using a telescopic sight required a shooter to lift their head several inches higher than normal to look through the lens, increasing their chances of being spotted or shot. With iron sights, he could stay lower, press close to the ground, concealed behind snowbanks and brush. His effective silhouette was smaller. In the flat terrain of the Karelian forests, where cover was extremely limited, every centimeter of height reduction mattered significantly. A sniper who raised his head to hide became a target himself. A sniper who remained low survived. The fourth reason was familiarity. He had no prior training with scoped rifles, and therefore preferred not to switch to an unfamiliar sighting system in the middle of combat operations. He had grown up using iron sights. His muscle memory, his instinctive sense of sight picture, his understanding of how to judge distance and wind and hold over, all of this had been developed with iron sights over thousands of hours of practice. Switching to a telescopic sight would require retraining, extensive practice, and a significant adjustment period. In the middle of a war with Soviet forces pouring across the border, there simply was no time for that learning curve. He used what he knew best. The rifle itself was exceptional for its intended purpose. The Sokko rifle was manufactured at the Sokko factory in Finland. It was a refined variant of the motionless, incorporating improvements developed by Finnish gunsmiths over several decades. The barrel was hammer-forged, providing superior accuracy compared to the standard Russian motionless. The action was hand-fitted with tighter tolerances that reduced play and improved consistency shot to shot. The trigger was lighter and crisper, breaking at approximately 3 to 4 pounds of pressure compared to the heavier, grittier triggers found on standard military rifles. The stock was carved from Arctic birch, a dense hardwood that resisted warping in temperature extremes and moisture exposure. Finnish gunsmiths understood that wood would naturally absorb moisture from snow and humidity, then dry out in heated interiors, causing dimensional changes that would shift the point of impact. Arctic birch minimized these effects dramatically. The stock design included a pistol grip that improved control and a cheek piece that provided consistent head placement for proper alignment with the iron sights. The rear sight was a simple notch design, adjustable for elevation using a ladder mechanism. The front sight was a blade approximately 2 mm wide at the tip. This sight picture required proper alignment technique. The shooter centered the front blade in the rear notch, ensured the top of the blade was perfectly level with the top of the notch, and placed the target just above this alignment. At 100 meters, this sight picture was accurate to within a few centimeters if the shooter did his part correctly. He always did his part. On one documented occasion, a major in the Finnish army witnessed he accurately hit a target some 500 feet away, striking that target 16 times in just 1 minute of sustained fire. 500 feet is approximately 150 meters. 16 shots in 60 seconds meant reloading the 5-round magazine 3 times while maintaining accuracy throughout. The mathematics reveal Häyhä's extraordinary capability. Each shot took an average of 3.75 seconds. This time included acquiring the target, aiming, firing, working the bolt to extract and eject the spent cartridge, loading a fresh round, closing the bolt, reacquiring the target through iron sights, and firing again. After every 5th shot, he had to drop the empty magazine, insert a fresh one, chamber a round, and continue firing, all while maintaining sufficient accuracy to hit a man-sized target at 150 meters. This performance was not luck. This was not chance. This was mastered skill developed through thousands upon thousands of repetitions over years of dedicated practice. The ammunition he used was standard Finnish military issue, 7.62 mm by 53 mm rimmed cartridge. The bullet weighed approximately 12 grams, traveling at roughly 800 meters per second. At close range, within 200 meters, the trajectory was relatively flat. Beyond that distance, the shooter needed to account for bullet drop, wind effects, and the effects of temperature on powder burn rate. He knew these variables instinctively. He had hunted in these conditions for years. He understood how extreme cold affected bullet performance, how wind pushed projectiles off course, how to estimate range by eye with remarkable accuracy. His equipment beyond the rifle was deliberately simple. He carried a white camouflage smock made from lightweight cotton fabric. Finnish quartermasters issued these to troops operating in snow-covered terrain. The smock covered his uniform completely, breaking up his outline against the white background. He wore a white balaclava, that covered his head and face, leaving only his eyes exposed. His mittens were white. His boots were wrapped in white canvas over standard military footwear. He became part of the landscape itself. Soviet soldiers searching for him saw nothing but snow and trees. His other equipment included a hunting knife of standard military issue, a canteen for water, though he often melted snow in his mouth rather than risk the sound of drinking from a canteen, a small amount of food, typically hard bread and sausage that would not freeze solid, a compass for navigation, and most importantly, infinite patience. He could remain absolutely motionless 4 hours on end. He would select a position before dawn, dig into the snow, arrange his firing rest carefully, pack snow around himself to eliminate any gaps that might show his outline, and wait. He waited for Soviet patrols to pass by. He waited for targets to present themselves. He waited for the perfect shot opportunity. Then he fired, worked the bolt efficiently, and fired again. His tactical approach was methodical and carefully planned. He never fired from the same position twice in succession. After engaging targets, he would withdraw from his position, move to a different location, sometimes several hundred meters away, and establish a completely new firing position. This practice prevented Soviet forces from pinpointing his location and calling artillery fire down on him. He selected positions that offered multiple escape routes, ensuring he could withdraw quickly if counter-snipers or infantry attempted to assault his position. He studied Soviet movement patterns carefully, learning their habits, their preferred routes, their timing. Soviet forces moved predictably, following roads and trails, congregating in clearings, forming up in columns that made excellent targets for a skilled marksman. On December 21, 1939, he reportedly killed 25 Soviet soldiers in a single day of operations. This was not accomplished in a single engagement. It was a series of calculated shots taken over the course of the short winter day, which lasted only about 6 hours of usable light at that latitude and time of year. The incident occurred in the forests near Kollaa, a small village that had become a focal point of Finnish defensive operations in that sector. Soviet forces were attempting to break through Finnish defensive lines, committing battalion-strength infantry formations, supported by artillery and armor assets. The Finnish 6th Company of the 34th Infantry Regiment was holding a defensive position along a narrow front. They were significantly outnumbered, but well positioned in terrain that heavily favored the defender. He moved into his firing position in the pre-dawn darkness. He had scouted this particular location the previous day for a reconnaissance patrol, identifying a snowbank that provided both cover and concealment while offering a clear field of fire across an open area that Soviet forces would need to cross to advance. He dug into the snow, creating a shallow depression that lowered his profile significantly below the surrounding terrain. He packed additional snow around himself, leaving only a small gap for his rifle barrel to protrude. Then he waited as the temperature continued to drop and darkness slowly gave way to the dim twilight that passed for daylight in a Finnish winter. At approximately 8 o'clock in the morning, with twilight just beginning to illuminate the forest sufficiently for aimed fire, a Soviet infantry column appeared in his field of view, 200 men moving in a loose formation, visible from a considerable distance. Their brown coats contrasted sharply against the snow, making them easy to track. They had no scouts moving ahead of the main body, no flankers moving through the trees to either side for security, just a column of men walking forward, trusting in their numbers and their orders. Unaware of the danger ahead, he estimated the range at approximately 150 meters, well within his practiced capability. He selected his first target carefully, a soldier near the front of the column who appeared to be an officer based on his position and the way other soldiers oriented toward him for guidance. He aligned his sights with practiced precision. Front blade centered perfectly in the rear notch, top of the blade level with the notch, target visible just above the alignment. He controlled his breathing carefully. Slow exhale, natural respiratory pause at the bottom of the breath. He pressed the trigger steadily rearward. The rifle fired. The report was sharp, but quickly absorbed by the snow and surrounding trees. The Soviet officer dropped instantly. For a brief moment, perhaps 2 or 3 seconds, the column didn't react at all. Then soldiers began looking around in confusion, seeking the source of the shot that had just killed their officer. Some soldiers dropped to the ground instinctively. Others ran toward the tree line, desperately seeking cover. Some simply stood frozen, unsure what to do. He worked the bolt mechanism smoothly. The spent brass cartridge ejected, tumbling into the snow beside him, where it would remain hidden. A fresh round fed smoothly from the magazine into the chamber. He closed the bolts, found his next target immediately, and fired again. A second Soviet soldier fell dead. Now the column descended into chaos. Men were running in different directions simultaneously, some toward the trees, some back the way they had come, some stood frozen in the open, presenting perfect targets. He fired methodically again and again. His magazine held 5 rounds. After the 5th shot, he dropped the empty magazine into the snow, inserted a fresh one from his pocket with practiced speed, chambered a round, and continued firing without significant interruption. The Soviet soldiers could not locate him, despite their growing desperation. His white camouflage rendered him effectively invisible against the snow. His chosen position was excellent, offering no obvious landmarks that would help identify where the deadly fire was coming from. The sound of the shots echoed through the forest, making accurate directional determination extremely difficult for men under stress. Some Soviet soldiers began firing blindly toward the general direction of the Finnish lines, spraying bullets into the trees without specific targets, without any real hope of hitting what they could not see. This accomplished nothing except wasting precious ammunition and revealing their own positions to other Finnish defenders in the area, who opened fire with machine guns and rifles, adding to the carnage and confusion. The entire engagement lasted approximately 3 minutes from first shot to the final withdrawal of Soviet forces. By the time the surviving Soviet soldiers had either retreated completely or found adequate cover, 25 men lay dead or wounded in the snow, their brown coats stark against the white landscape. He had fired approximately 30 rounds, -1, achieving a hit rate exceeding 80% under field conditions. He remained in his concealed position for another full hour after the shooting stopped, watching carefully, waiting to see if the Soviets would return or attempt to recover their casualties. They did not return. Eventually, satisfied that the immediate area was clear of enemy forces, he withdrew from his position. He moved carefully and deliberately through the forest to a different pre-selected position a 400 meters away, covering his tracks as he went, erasing all evidence of his presence from the area. This engagement represented a single day's work. Across the entire duration of the Winter War, he repeated this basic pattern hundreds of times with deadly consistency. By March of 1940, when the war finally ended, his confirmed kill count had reached 505, although some historical estimates suggest the actual number may have been as high as 542. These numbers were confirmed through Finnish military records, documented meticulously by his company commander, and verified through detailed after-action reports filed with higher headquarters. The count did not include probable kills, wounded, enemies who may have later died, or targets he engaged with his submachine gun during close-quarters fighting when Soviet forces actually reached Finnish defensive positions. 505 confirmed kills with his rifle alone. Over the course of approximately 100 days of active combat operations, this averaged roughly 5 kills per day. But the distribution was far from even across those 100 days. Some days he did not engage enemy forces at all, remaining in position for hours, but finding no suitable targets that met his engagement criteria. Other days, like December 21st, he eliminated 25 enemies in just a few hours of sustained operations. The psychological impact on Soviet forces was severe and well documented. Soviet troops assigned here an appropriately sinister nickname that reflected their fear: White Death. They feared him. They feared the unseen sniper who could kill them from positions they could not identify, at ranges they did not think possible with iron sights. Soviet commanders issued specific orders forbidding unnecessary movement during daylight hours in sectors where he was believed to be operating. They directed massive artillery fire at suspected sniper positions, expending thousands of shells in attempts to eliminate a single man. They employed specialized counter-sniper teams, flooding areas with their own marksmen whose primary mission was to locate and kill the White Death. None of these measures proved effective. His tactics, his deliberate use of iron sights, his masterful camouflage, and his intimate understanding of the terrain made him nearly impossible to locate and eliminate through conventional means. The broader context of Häyhä's success must be understood within the framework of the catastrophic performance of Soviet forces during the Winter War overall. When the fighting finally ended in March 1940, the Winter War had left 25,940 Finns dead. The Soviets lost at least 126,875 soldiers killed. More recent research by Russian historians has placed Soviet casualties even higher than these figures. A Russian historian who specializes in Russian-Finnish conflicts conducted an extensive research project attempting to establish a clearer picture of Soviet losses. This project documented 138,551 irretrievable losses, meaning killed in action or missing and presumed dead, plus 206,538 wounded, giving a total casualty figure of 345,089 Soviet casualties. This represented a casualty rate that was unprecedented in modern warfare for an attacking force operating against a defender with vastly inferior numbers and equipment. The Finns mobilized approximately 320,000 soldiers total. The Soviets committed somewhere between 450,000 and 760,000 troops, depending on which phase of the war one examines. The numerical advantage ranged from 1.5 to 1 up to 2.4 to 1 in favor of the Soviets. Yet Soviet casualties exceeded Finnish casualties by a ratio of 5 to 1, or possibly higher. The reasons for this extraordinary disparity were multiple and interconnected, creating a perfect storm of failure for the Soviet military. The purge of the Soviet military during Stalin's Great Terror in the years immediately preceding the invasion left the army's command structure in complete disarray. Thousands of experienced, competent officers had been executed or sent to forced labor camps. The officers who survived and remained in positions of authority were politically reliable but often tactically incompetent or unwilling to make independent decisions. They issued orders that made no tactical sense given the actual terrain and weather conditions their troops faced. They committed entire divisions to attacks along single narrow roads where Finnish forces could easily surround and destroy them. They failed to coordinate infantry operations with armor and artillery support. They sent men forward in mass formations that presented excellent targets for Finnish machine gunners and riflemen. Soviet soldiers were equipped and trained for conventional warfare in temperate conditions. They wore brown uniforms and coats that stood out starkly against snow-covered terrain, making them visible at extreme distances. They had virtually no specialized winter equipment, no snowshoes, inadequate cold weather gear. In some Soviet units, casualties from frostbite and exposure actually exceeded casualties from enemy fire. Men lost fingers and toes to frostbite. They developed life-threatening hypothermia while attempting to dig defensive positions in ground frozen solid. They could not maneuver effectively through deep snow, reducing their tactical mobility to a fraction of what military doctrine assumed. Finnish soldiers, by stark contrast, had grown up in this environment. They possessed proper winter uniforms, snowshoes, and skis that allowed rapid movement through terrain where Soviet forces could barely move at all. They moved through the forest with practiced ease, while Soviet forces literally floundered in snowdrifts. The Soviet logistics system collapsed almost completely under the strain of attempting to supply forces operating in Arctic conditions. Supply columns became stranded in massive snowdrifts. Trucks and other vehicles broke down in the extreme cold. Fuel froze. Food shipments failed to reach forward units with any regularity. Ammunition reserves ran dangerously low. Soviet soldiers went hungry while fighting in some of the harshest conditions on Earth. Finnish logistics, while certainly limited by Finland's small industrial base, were nevertheless more effective because they had been specifically designed for this environment from the beginning. The Finns used horses and sleds to move supplies through areas where vehicles could not operate. They established supply depots hidden deep in forests where Soviet reconnaissance could not locate them. They operated on interior lines of communication, moving supplies much shorter distances than the Soviets needed to. Soviet tactical doctrine emphasized mass assault tactics, overwhelming firepower through artillery and armor, and rapid advances along main transportation routes. In the Karelian forests, this doctrine failed catastrophically and completely. Roads were extremely few and dangerously narrow. Armor could not maneuver off established roads. Infantry formations confined to roads became perfect targets for Finnish ambush tactics. The Finns developed their Motti tactic specifically and deliberately to exploit Soviet vulnerabilities. One of the most devastating examples occurred during the Battle of Suomussalmi. The Soviet 44th Division and elements of the 163rd Rifle Division, comprising approximately 14,000 troops total, were almost completely destroyed by a Finnish force less than one-third their size. The Finns allowed the Soviet column to advance deep into Finnish-controlled territory along a forest road, then cut the road behind them, completely isolating the force from reinforcement or resupply. They methodically divided the column into separate segments, surrounded each segment with ski troops, and destroyed each one over the course of several days.